When it comes to creating content for online audiences, few people are more experienced than Mark Talkington. He was one of the original editors of ESPN.com and then later spent 20 years as a news editor for MSN.com, the massive web portal owned by Microsoft. But starting at the beginning of the pandemic, Mark began writing for a much smaller readership, the residents of Palm Springs, California. Taking advantage of the fact that most government meetings were now being broadcast online, he spent his nights and weekends writing a daily newsletter dedicated to keeping citizens informed about their local community. The newsletter was called the Palm Springs Post, and it was an instant hit, growing to 13,000 subscribers in a little over a year. By 2022, he was able to hire another journalist and launch a second newsletter covering a nearby region. Earlier this year, he left his job at Microsoft to focus full-time on growing his company. In our interview, Mark talked about how he produced a newsletter during his free time, his business model, and what other local news entrepreneurs can learn from his approach. Hello, I'm Simon Owens, and this is The Business of Content, the show about how publishers create, distribute, and monetize their digital content. If you want to listen to an audio version of this show, subscribe to The Business of Content wherever you get your podcasts. Okay, now on to my interview with Mark. Hey Mark, thanks for joining me.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So we're here to talk about a local news venture that you launched a few years ago. But first, let's give some context to my listeners about, what your background is in media. You've actually been working for several decades for very large media brands, I think starting with ESPN and then moving on to Microsoft. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. So, like a lot of people in this industry, I cut my teeth at newspapers, starting with weeklies and then dailies. Did the whole gamut of beats, politics, police, all that stuff. Um, but around the mid 90s, I started playing with the internet. I went to my paper at the time, which was a big Gannett paper here in my current hometown, and said, "Hey, we got to put this thing on the internet." They laughed me out of the room, and I said, it's probably a good time to make a move toward the future. So I did. Um, and I moved up to Seattle, went to work for a guy named Paul Allen who had co-founded Microsoft, and he was dabbling in the internet, and we got contracted to build a sports site that it became ESPN.com and really off and running, right? When ESPN.com got bought out fully by Disney, they wanted to move everybody to Bristol, Connecticut, to consolidate the editorial operations, and a lot of us stayed behind, and most of us went across the pond, Lake Washington, and went to work for Microsoft, and that's where I went in 2002 and began my stint on the homepage of MSN.com. Served a lot of roles from breaking news editor to really project management, kind of being a liaison between editorial and engineering, and that stint. It comes to an end on December 30th when I will be one of three US-based editors who will be the last human editors to work on the MSN.com homepage. They are finally going to turn it all over to automation after all these years, and we're gone. That's it. It's just machines that are going to run it, which sounds familiar to anybody in this business.
Well, there's a lot to unpack there. So you helped launch ESPN's initial website.
Correct.
And
Yeah.
what did it? And this was back in the '90s. What did it? What kind of content? Because that was back when ESPN was nowhere near as big as it is today, and was like like a cable news channel. What kind of content were you putting on ESPN.com in the '90s?
So we were basically, we had a couple of things that are traditional. We had feeds, right? Wire feeds that covered all the contests, all the sports aggregate, all that type of stuff. And we had columnists. We had the on-air personalities whose content, we would spin up into stories. And then we got contracted by leagues. So we launched NBA.com, NFL.com, NASCAR.com. We never did get the MLB contract, but then we had leagues. So then we had a subset of the editorial department that was out covering things like NASCAR. I was covering NASCAR for a few years, and we were just fighting and scrapping for any content. The joy then was that there was no ink. It was just endless. And I think every single one of us, not to get too far back into the nostalgia machine, but every single one of us was just just blown away by the fact if we put a curse word in a headline by accident, we could change it in 30 seconds. Nothing lived forever, and that was so great. And we went off and running. We developed some of the first video tools, some of the first audio tools. We were taking machinery into like locker rooms and drivers meetings and recording things and putting it out there on the internet. We didn't really have a whole lot of data to tell if something was working, but we just went for it. If something sounded good, we built it and we went for it.
And like the internet audience back then was just so tiny compared to today. I think like, by the late 90s, there were only something like 50 million internet users. I don't know if that was worldwide or just in the US. And there wasn't very much of a business model. Was it like, what did it make money? Was it a profitable business, or was this all
It,
just
it
kind of like a,
was.
it was, wow.
Yeah, ESPN was in the very unique situation, and I still remember this, of advertisers just ESPN.com, advertisers just throwing themselves at us. We were sold out. We couldn't produce enough inventory. It was all banner ads, right? But then we started figuring out how to offer services to companies that would come and want to contract us. Uh, just the not the paid advertising type stuff, but just doing promotions, right? Just doing that type of stuff that looked like editorial content but was serving an advertiser need. And that was a whole other division that got spun up, right? Toyota would come to us and say, well, we want to give you X amount of millions of dollars. What can you do for us? And we could say, oh, well, we can give you these ads, but we can also build a special section. We can launch a contest where your branding is. We were just throwing branding at anything we could build, and we were building some really cool stuff, and it was very, very profitable. So that's why Disney at some point, not I'll probably be struck down for this, but Disney was siphoning a lot of money from ESPN, and it was pissing a lot of people off in the corner offices. And then they finally just bought the whole thing, and I think that was how that got resolved. But it was making a lot of money, unlike MSN, which didn't really make a lot of money for Microsoft until some of the latter years, and then became a billion-dollar business. But when you're a billion-dollar business inside a $62 billion corporation, you're always the wicked stepchild.
Yeah, and we could talk about a little bit about now I think I just read recently about how Microsoft is doubling down on growing its advertising revenue, so that's becoming more and more important. But like, so ESPN back then, so it's now completely owned by Disney. Was it jointly owned by Microsoft and Disney at the time?
Now, ESPN was owned by Starwave and Disney. So Starwave is the company that Paul Allen started. It owned 51% of it, and Disney owned 49% of it. And then it flipped, and Disney, I think, bought the whole thing, and they cashed us out at Starwave.
Was Paul Allen still at Microsoft at that point, or?
No, Paul had left Microsoft due to his health issues, and then was just out experimenting with stuff. And Starwave was the company he built uh, to dabble in the internet and what that looked like. It started out doing like CD-ROMs and stuff like that because the internet wasn't around. But yeah, so there's a whole group of original Starwave folks.
And how did that ESPN job lead to a job at Microsoft after Disney bought it? Did Paul Allen make the recommendation that Microsoft
No,
hire his
no.
team, or it was just?
No, that was us. We had the opportunity, so we had the option, right? The editors had the option, and the staff at ESPN, that we were all Seattle based, had the option. You can move to Bristol or maybe go to New York where ESPN the magazine was launching, or you could stay behind in Seattle. If you stay behind in Seattle, you got to find another job. And a large number of us just went to Microsoft. There were content the 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 idea that content had value was not really was not really widespread out there in the world at the time. It certainly wasn't widespread at Microsoft, which was an engineering driven culture. Um, but they reluctantly started to see that, okay, maybe some of this stuff does work. Maybe some of this stuff does have a value. Maybe we should have a presence. They launched MSN in 1995. It came with Windows 95, and they started to see value in advertising. In people will buy the software to get this exclusive content. They launched all sorts of different content projects like Underwire, which was aimed at women, all sorts of different things that they tried. And they got into they we ended up actually getting into business with ESPN. ESPN was the sports provider for MSN, and we shelled their website with our the MSN branding. But it was those hazy early days of 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 having one foot stuck in the past, right? Like we all came from newspapers and magazines, and one foot firmly planted in the future. We can do really cool things on the web that are not like newspapers, and we should.
Yeah, and it was like partnered with all kinds of companies. So like before NBC owned all of MSNBC, Microsoft owned part of that, correct? And then I think Microsoft once co-owned Slate. I know.
Yep.
I think it was also running the website for Money Magazine from Time Inc. So there were all these kinds of like hybrid partnerships back then, right?
Yep. There were, yeah, exactly. Yeah, the Slate partnership was one that stood out. Yeah, and then what that evolved to was partnerships where we weren't doing any of the work, right? So where it stands now is that there's 1,100 or 1,200 different content partners that all their content is just ingested, into into Microsoft. It's cleaned up and spit out on the web. And like anybody who comes to MSN.com, there's a billion different versions of the page. You're going to get a different version of the page every time you come. All that type of algorithm stuff, and we've gone in and out of different algorithms and different approaches. We've tried to hand edit it, and that didn't fail. AOL tried the same thing to create like a version uh, that you had to opt into, and like only 2% of people ever opted into it. Um, so yeah, there was a lot of experimenting, but where it ended up being is that it is the very simple model that get as much content as you can, generate as many page views as you can, and rev share the heck out of that, and and make money.
Yeah. So some of my younger audience members not might not remember this or know of it, but like MSN was known what it was typically called a portal, and Yahoo and
Yeah,
AOL were also in this. And the idea was, I think I'm guessing a lot of the traffic came from people who were using the email products and stuff like that. So they would go to some homepage to log into their email, but there would also be news headlines and stuff like that. And it was mainly like an aggregator. How did you source content? Like I'm guessing some of it was syndicated, but when I was at U.S. News and World Report, we used to repurpose a lot of our content for like Yahoo, MSN, and if I remember correctly, you guys didn't actually pay us. That was like all about how we could we could insert related links to our content, and if you featured one of our articles, then that would drive all sorts of other traffic in our links that we inserted to our other content. Was that kind of how a lot of the deals were structured?
yeah, and on the homepage team, which is a team I've always been on, there were really two different silos, right? One was content that would appear on the site that was not quite sponsored content, but had those links in there where you would get revenue from a conversion, right? And then with those links, not to get too into the weeds, but with those links, you were focused on that conversion. So you didn't want, we really didn't want to trick click anybody. We really didn't want to do any listicles or anything that generated page views. We needed true unadulterated conversion. So we would purposely make sure that the headlines were almost boring. And then there was the traditional rev share, where we would partner with different content providers and sell ads against it and split the revenue that way. So again, I think the model that survived tends to, is this rev share. I know that, it's always interesting that yes, MSN's an aggregator, um, just like Yahoo and AOL. And it's still around, right? Like everybody, we knew that our core audience came from buying Windows 95 and getting that Hotmail address, right? And we over the years we just saw this lump kind of moving, and we thought, well, at some time that they're going to die and we won't have an audience. It didn't happen that way. Microsoft found different ways to get the content that it was ingesting and cleaning up for partners across different surfaces, and it's now you know, with cutting all the humans, it's generating a great deal of revenue for them. We always thought, man, especially during the Bing days, when we were going hot and heavy on Bing as a competitor to Google, we always thought, well, Amazon's going to buy us or something's going to happen. Bomber tried to merge with Yahoo. Bomber tried to buy Yahoo, and that failed. But we always thought that was kind of the way we had to go. We were doing the interesting thing from my perspective, and probably nobody else's but the team, is that we were doing really good editorial work. We had high ethical standards. We knew be first, but first be right. We knew don't launch. It's okay to launch the breaking news banner after Yahoo or AOL as long as we have our facts straight. We held ourselves, and our entire editorial team held ourselves to really really strict standards. So even though we were an aggregator, we were still practicing really good journalism day in and day out, and it was rewarding.
Yeah, so like your team was responsible for, you said you had something like 1,600 content partners, is looking through that massive feed and determining what was newsworthy, who had the best version of whatever story was breaking, and then where to place that on that homepage, how to like write the headline so that it accurately described what was happening, different stuff like that.
Yep, yeah, that was it. And we had verticals, right? So we had people who were working the sports channel and the entertainment channel and the money channel, and they were actively pitching to us through various methods over the years. When we first started, we had a kind of an assembly line based on email templates, and it would be, we would get a pitch through email from one of our channel partners. Hey, this money story's a good one. We think you should use. Okay, we'll use it. And then we would kick off an email that sent it to get a photo, and then that would be forwarded to get copy edited, and then that would be forwarded to be built in the CMS. And and now it's really funny. The dream system that me and another guy always wanted to do was just to be able to stand up there and move squares around. Well, now our CMS is that, right? We monitor different signals, and then we see which partner has the best content, and we just take the square and we drag it over, and boom, there you go. We built, we built it.
Yeah, and I think what always surprises people who have grown up, getting their news through Facebook or TikTok or newsletters and stuff like that, like how massive these portals were at their peak, and still how massive they are today. And like you would be surprised that some of these, the Yahoos and the micro and the MSNs and the AOLs of the world, even AOL.coms of the world, like how much traffic they still see on a daily basis.
You would be very surprised.
Yeah. So tell me about the community you live in now, and when did you move there, and what kind of local news coverage has it had over the years from like legacy newspapers and
Yeah,
local news stations and stuff like that?
so I live in Palm Springs, California, which is actually a small town of about 44,000 people that that balloons to about three times that amount during the winter months when the snowbirds come down here from Minnesota and Vancouver and all those places. Um, but the core group of people who are here is pretty small. It is part of the larger Coachella Valley, which is nine cities of about 450,000 people, and had been served very well. So it had all of the media you would expect. It had a Gannett paper, which was my last paper I worked at before moving back up to Seattle. Um, uh, it has two TV stations. They're like the 148th largest market, so not too big. And then it has an independent monthly kind of arts and entertainment publication. It has an entertainment weekly that's kind of a one of these deals where they sell the front cover and stuff like that. And in Palm Springs itself, we have Desert Gay News, which caters to the large LGBTQ population we have here. So that's it had all those traditional things. I was here back in the mid 90s until the late 90s, and then had always during the whole time I was up in Seattle working at Microsoft and ESPN, we'd always come back here because we'd enjoy the desert. And then finally in 2016, we bought a condo. I moved down here full time back then. And again, I'll tell you, I really didn't pay much attention to the news, right? Like when I was working at the paper, I wasn't a reporter. I was the page one editor. So I had to kind of put together the whole front page. So I was monitoring, all the news, and I didn't pay a lot of attention to what was happening in the city. Not that it didn't interest me, but I had other things to do. And then this whole time, right? Like working at Microsoft, we've worked from home basically since 2012, so it was nice. My job was just sitting, in this condo with the windows open and the birds chirping, editing this giant portal, get done with work, go have coffee, and I didn't really pay attention. What I do remember happening is around the time that Gannett was sold here a few years back, the difference in the daily paper, which I still had many friends at who I know and loved, and it was a high quality paper. The it just started to really shockingly go downhill, right? So when I was there were 75 people in the newsroom. I think there's about a dozen left in the newsroom now. They just formed a union, so they have to be collectively bargained with. So they can't suffer these layoffs that all these other Gannett papers are. But they're starting to lay off the non-union employees, the editors, and they sold the building. It was a beautiful building that I worked in with a printing press and all that. They print now in Arizona, truck it back into the town overnight or whatever. Um, and stop printing a Saturday edition. They're doing all the things that all the other Gannett papers are doing, but it's just shocking.
Yeah, and my guess with only 12 reporters, they're probably getting stretched across a lot of different beats. So a lot of they're probably not. Especially you mentioned there are multiple cities within this area, so each with their own town councils, school boards,
Yep.
things like that. So probably a lot of stuff was falling through the net eventually.
Right, and that's what I noticed. So I had some spare time, I guess, uh, but I just noticed that the city wasn't getting covered, and I didn't really know anybody in the town. I wasn't a mover and shaker. I was just, working my day job and living here. But I started to notice that city council meetings weren't getting covered, and if they were, they because the deadline for print was 4:30 in the afternoon to get it, you know, com- uh, made up wherever it was going to be made up. City councils are on Thursday. You wouldn't see it in the actual newspaper until Saturday. Um, and I knew that the reporter covering Palm Springs was also covering two other cities. And this town is not the type of town that'll stand for that. And this town is a very active, very involved town. A lot of retirees who are used to having a big, aggressive paper in the towns they live in, and really professional, media for their TV stations, and they weren't getting that. So I stepped in and said, okay, you know what? I mean, I know how to cover City Hall. I know how to cover a beat. I'm just going to go write about City Hall and cover these city council meetings. And I started doing that on Substack. And it just, it blew up because, right person uh, at the right time with the right product, really. Really.
So you launched the Substack in early 2021, correct?
Yeah, February 2021 with like three people.
And what was it
Three,
called?
three, re- three subscribers, and it's called the Palm Springs Post.
Palm Springs Post, and you say that you covered city council meetings and stuff like that. And that was probably an outgrowth of the pandemic that allowed you to do that because I'm guessing they started, live streaming on like Zoom and stuff like that, which meant that you didn't have to physically go to the actual government meetings and stuff like that.
Yeah, it leveled the playing field between me and any other reporter in town. And because I was exclusively focused on Palm Springs, I was covering every meeting. You
Yeah,
know,
and so how often in the early days, how often was the newsletter coming out?
5 days a week.
Oh wow, so
Yeah. So I would get done with my day job and fire up the computer and attend these meetings at night. Planning Commission, City Council, Arts Commission, and then just started expanding. Right, people started throwing me stories and finding me, and it made a name for itself. and I started getting lots and lots and lots of stories. It was about 9 months, the paper had tried to hire me, had offered me, a role or two, and I had, declined it because of the rate of pay was a little offensive, um, which is to be expected, obviously. And I remember at the time, like I said, look, here's what I want to make, and if you don't pay me that, I'm going to kick your ass all over this town. And I went out and did it. Um, and it took about 9 months before they brought in a dedicated reporter and threw them just at Palm Springs, which is exactly what I wanted. Because I knew if they threw resources at Palm Springs, that when I popped up with my second product on the other side of the valley, that that they weren't going to have resources to keep up with me over there. So that jumping ahead a bit, but that's where I'm at now.
Yeah, so I remember my days. I started like you as a local news reporter. My very first government meeting I went to, it might have been school board or something like that. I went, I kind of jotted down notes, and then I tried to write an article that just basically summarized everything that happened at that meeting.
Yeah,
And then
right,
my editor came back to me. He's like, no, 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 no. These are just jumping off points. These are multiple stories that you need to go now write articles about. Like they voted on this initiative. Okay, you need to write about
right.
what an article about. So like, was that what you were doing? Were you just writing like a summary of what was going on at the meetings, or were you like writing individual stories, or how were you approaching the reporting process?
Yeah, I mean it ebbed and flowed, but basically where it's at is, you pick your spot and you focus in on that. Um, the newsletter itself, so now it's a website and a newsletter, but most people know it as the newsletter that gets delivered to their email every morning at 6 a.m. The newsletter itself used to be, like a CVS receipt, 4 miles long. And as I've adjusted that and learned a few things along the way, now the newsletter is shrunk way down, and there's always a jump. Hey, if you want to read more, I've written 500 words on this. You'll only see 250 or 300 words here that tells you the entire story. But I stopped. I would do in the early days, I would do a summary and bullet points of everything that happened. Um, but now I just break those out as separate stories when warranted.
So you're doing it 5 days a week. It says you said you were going like nine months on your own at least, and you had this day job working for MSN.com. How like were you just completely just burning the candle at both ends?
Yes. So 100 hours a week, 7 days a week. I went 568 days before I took my first day off. Um, uh, you know, create stress and strain on every relationship I ever had. And now, when people call me and want to consult about how they can do what I've done, first thing I say is don't go out the door daily. Go out weekly, find, take a much easier pace. And that's what we did with the second product is we're going at a much slower pace. And the growth and the revenue is not as explosive and immediate, but that's okay. Um, that's okay. And I would never recommend anybody working a full-time job, having obligations, committing to 5 days a week, because in a town of 44,000 people, you may be shocked to learn there ain't a lead story every night. And sometimes you got to pull a rabbit out of your hat at 9 o'clock at night, and you got to throw something out there that you're not too proud of, but but it gets the paper out.
Yeah, so you start with three or four people subscribed. How did you get like when did you start feeling like wow, this is there's obviously some kind of word of mouth going on here because I'm seeing multiple signups a day or something like that.
Yeah, so what I would do is I'd put the newsletter out, and then I'd break the stories into Substack wasn't really a CMS, but I'd break the stories into separate, for lack of a better word, stories on Substack, and just to get a URL, and I would throw those URLs out on social. And I remember, like, I was covering stuff that other people weren't covering, obviously, and had a couple of good scoops, about 6 months in, 8 months in, or whatever, and all of a sudden, boop, you see that, oh, I got 250 people in one day. What the heck happened? And then you go back and you look and you see, well, it got shared and shared and shared. Um, so that was my model: daily newsletter distribution on social channels, and then storage on Substack was my model for a long time before it wasn't.
Yeah. So you mentioned that you launched a sister publication. You also hired another reporter, like I think in a full time capacity. Which one of those two things came first?
Yeah, so 1 year in February of this year, 2022, I hired Kendall Balchin, who was a local producer, who I met, who had they had her TV station had interviewed me for a story I did, and we got to talking and we had coffee and found out that she wanted out of corporate media. She was working 70 hours a week, getting paid for 40. Had a bunch, had some associated health issues with the stress. Um, and so I said, well, whenever you're ready, let me know. And she ended up being ready in February, and I brought her on full time. Um, and and we've been off and running. She's learning every aspect of the business, whether it's how to build the newsletter, how to write the news stories, but also she's in the actual business side of things with me, the business development, audience development, revenue. She's learning all the ropes, so eventually she can take over, hopefully. And I can't do this forever.
So
And
she's
then
helping on both publications, not just the
yeah, so
sister
she's
publication.
helping on both. So the plan was to go really aggressive in 2023 and build. I'm really happy with where the Post is, and it's great. It was immediately sustainable right out the door. And now this other publication that covers the rest of the Coachella Valley. My plan was to go aggressively on that and take it daily in 2023. And to do that, I was going to hire a reporter, and I had some issues just trying to find the right person to believe in independent media, to believe in kind of the startup, uh, uh, you know, role that we're in, or the startup functionality we're doing, whatever it is, um, and also just to believe in how I operate, right? Like I I believe in 4-day work weeks. I believe in going home at the end of the day when your work's done, whether that's 2 hours or 6 hours or 8 hours. I believe that you come before the product. All these things that I learned over the years to be a decent manager at Microsoft, I took with me to this. And I have found people from the newspaper background, especially people who have maybe, let's say, 5 years experience, are freaked out. I hired a guy in June, and I think I scared him. He just got freaked out that what do you mean I can have a day off and you'll pay me? I'm like, yeah, dude, if you want to go to the Dodgers game, just let me know in the morning. Your mental health's important. Go to the Dodger game. I'll pay you. And it just wasn't like a cultural type of fit. So I found that the same thing this go round. Uh, and so what I did instead is, when I couldn't land a reporter, it's hard to convince somebody to move somewhere where it gets 120 degrees in the summer. Um, what I did instead is I hired a copy editor slash newsletter editor who is a former reporter here. Um, and she's made all the difference in the world. What she did is clear up 8 hours of my reporter's time, and 8 hours of my time. I don't have to copy edit stories. I don't have to build calendars. There's a lot of this busy work. Same thing with my reporter. So now I'm able to take that reporter and aim her at different places in the valley. I'm still anchored in Palm Springs, covering the heck out of Palm Springs, and then I just send her out into the far-flung reaches of the valley, and that's working really well.
Yeah, because like there's a lot of stuff in news that's just kind of like busy work, like aggregating like church news and stuff like that, like upcoming functions and stuff like that.
Yep.
Which I'm guessing you have some kind of activities section or something like that.
Yeah,
So
we have a really robust calendar, and my wife was doing it 10 hours. She was spending 10 hours on Sunday and then 2 hours every night doing it. An unpaid volunteer managing the calendar, um, and and yeah, that wasn't fair, right? So getting back some of my time in my life to have, maybe a Saturday where I wasn't working, but then having your wife working 10 hours putting together your community calendar, that doesn't work, right? That's you don't have quality time. So that has been the toughest the toughest thing to do was that darn calendar, but it works really, really well, and it's a huge popular part of both the newsletter and the website.
So talk to me about like what you've able to accomplish from impact perspective, because you talk about how the Gannett paper really kind of rolled back, wasn't covering a lot of stuff. What is some of the stuff that you feel has made like a real impact on the community? You've mentioned to me in a previous phone call, like your coverage of the homeless community. The cut you did some data journalism around rentals because apparently that's a
Yep.
big issue in Palm Springs. Talk about the kind of more impact reporting that you've done.
Yeah, so going out the door, right, I surveyed the community. I surveyed my audience, and it was 300, but I keep surveying it every time you sign up. And and I've gone to maybe 100 plus coffees with just anybody who wanted to have coffee with me, anybody who wanted to engage. You didn't have to be the mayor, right? I mean, just anybody. And really getting a sense of what the community wanted to know. And the community told me three things: homelessness, short term vacation rentals, and the housing crisis, right? And, lo and behold, they're all kind of related. But I dived in. I dived in by covering the homeless community, interviewing the people in the homeless community, taking a look at the city's relationship with its homeless services provider, um, a- talking to the police about where the homeless in our community were coming from, and exposing programs from the county or from the jail system that were actually busing people into our community during COVID and putting them up in local hotels, unbeknownst to the police chief, right? So they're watching the homeless population expand, and they don't know where everybody's coming from, and then we figure it out. um, and yeah, and taking a good hard look again at the nonprofit that the city had been doing business with, and finding that their books and their taxes weren't, as professionally done as they could have been, which led to kind of the breakup of the relationship between the city and the services provider, and the city signing contracts with somebody else, a larger one who'd been around, had more experience. And then moving forward from there, they, they they're building a like a campus services center. So all of that, just I didn't start the ball rolling on that, but some of the reporting I did early on really showed people were like, "What is going on?" And I told them, "Here's what's going on." Right? Especially interviewing the homeless people, dozens of people I talked to, um, who said, I'm in Palm Springs because the drugs are good and there's not a lot of gated communities, so it's easy for me to go in and steal your bike, and I got money anytime I want. And I ain't going anywhere because of those reasons, and because I feel safe here with with my friends. And that was a real eye opener for the community, right? The community passes by folks living on the streets, and they're like, "What the heck is going on in our town?" Well, I told them what was going on in their town. And I think that's high impact because it focused the community, and it focused city leaders on stuff that everybody knew was important. Everybody knew there was an issue, but they didn't really know what the city was doing, and they weren't really up in arms in it. They were just complaining on Facebook and Nextdoor. So that's the type of basic community service journalism you do, right? And the same thing happened with the short-term vacation rentals. Everybody knew that the city was one of the few places left here in our valley where you could do an Airbnb, and everybody knew
Because other
that
cities had outlawed it or something like that.
yeah. So they either banned them or never allowed them in the first place, right? So the squeeze kept being put on Palm Springs, um, and more, right? Like more and more. And Palm Springs did a great job establishing a licensing procedure and putting rules in place and doing code enforcement. But still, it was there was no cap. So what we had at one point when I first started diving in was, over 2,000 short-term vacation rentals. Some neighborhoods were comprised of upwards of 35% of vacation rentals. And so the talk in the town was, man, my neighborhood's really different, and I don't see kids anymore, and I don't have neighbors anymore. How many of these homes in my neighborhood are short-term vacation rentals? Well, I just did the thing you do. I got the address of every license. I put it, I opened up a spreadsheet. I put it in that spreadsheet. I imported the spreadsheet into Google, and boom, there was your map. There was a little red dot for every place that was a short-term vacation rental. And that kind of turned people upside down. And what that led to was not only it was finally some a discussion point. People would hold that map up, and the city went ahead and decided it was overdue to kind of take a look at its regulations on vacation rentals. But it formed a subcommittee of residents to address the issue. They came away with an agreement to limit the percentage of homes in each designated neighborhood. There's like 52 of them officially here. Um, uh, and 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 to make sure that there are rules in place that get back to the more traditional vacation rental, right? You own a second home. You want to rent it out a few times a year so that you can afford that second home, and you eventually want to move here. That's the traditional path that people arrive in Palm Springs, the retirees anyway. And that was going away because corporations were coming in and buying every single house they could find, turning it into like a tiny motel, right? And that was really worrisome to people. Not so much the weekend partiers, the Coachella crowd, and all that, but just really the fabric of neighborhoods was kind of being, uh, uh, you know, whittled down a little bit, and that was worrisome to people. Um, the housing crisis, I mean, again, it's all interrelated, right? People are concerned that our homes went from like 650,000 for an average size home to 1.3 million, but a lot of that was COVID. And a lot of that came along when people could work anywhere and they chose to come work in paradise. But those are the issues I dived in on, that were the major issues. And of course, it's on my whiteboard here, just these giant words that say impact. I don't measure the success of this business by revenue. I measure it by the impact we can make in the community, whether it's, hey, Gardner had all the tools stolen from his truck. Here's his GoFundMe page, and you raise $4,000 for the guy overnight. Or, hey, we have an overabundance of large dogs at the animal shelter. Put a little thing in there, and the next morning people are lining up at the animal shelter to help alleviate the overcrowding of large dogs. Time and time and time again. There's these little success stories. We try to keep them all in a spreadsheet. I get invited to talk about it at conferences. It's really nice. But that impact is what it's just at the core of what you do as a journalist, and at the core of what you should be doing as 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 a newspaper or whatever you are. You should not you should not be you should just not be out there chasing page views and rev share and bottom line, and you just shouldn't be doing that. That's not the future.
Well, speaking of revenue, it may not be your North Star, but you did have to reach sustainability, obviously, in order to
Yeah.
make this work in the long term. When did you introduce a business model to the newsletter?
So I partnered with IndieGraph, which is a company out of Canada that was started by two sisters, um, and and went through a program of theirs and kind of popped out the other side with a little bit of advertising budget on Facebook to acquire audience. And and during this process and during the first umpteen months, 9 months, people were saying, how can I support you? What can I do? I don't want to lose the post. You're a really important part of the community. And I'm like, I don't know. I don't really have a business model. Um, I don't, I don't know what to do. Buy me coffee. I don't know. I was working a job. I didn't need to earn a living doing it. I was just doing it, because I thought it was a need. But IndieGraph had seen success with, kind of the NPR model, right? The listener supported radio. So they're like, look, there's a model, and the model is you do some advertising, and you do some grants, and you do some audience revenue, and you do some of this and some of that, and that's how you become sustainable. So I went with them. I had the choice to dive in with another company that was venture capital funded, but it was folks out of Silicon Valley, and they talked the language I was used to hearing at Microsoft, which is, how do we spin this up? How do we make the most money? How do all that type of stuff? And it was just I didn't want to go that route, so I went with these folks, and they built. in the background, they built all of they built the website. They changed me over to Mailchimp for the newsletter. They set up all the revenue systems. They sell advertising for me in the newsletter and the website. They set all this type of stuff up, and once I flipped the switch in October, and said, okay, community, you know, we're starting a founding members campaign. Boom. I mean, I'm almost in tears. It was just instant success. This community just threw themselves at me. Um, and,
And
and
so
we knew
what does that mean though? So like you were adamantly against paywalls, right?
absolutely.
So
Yeah.
how did you frame the membership program? How did you
Yeah.
push it? How did you drive conversions, stuff like that?
So the message was simple. It was just the honest truth, right? Look, I'm out here busting my butt, covering your community and giving it to you for free. Nothing is for subscribers only. You go over to the website of the local paper, and paywall, 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 99-cent special, and and I just think that that's a busted model, and it's hurting the fabric of our democracy to hide vital information from people. When I talk to people who live in mobile homes who cannot afford a subscription, and I give them basic news and information about their city, such as, "Hey, my neighborhood floods. What the heck can be done about it?" And I tell them, oh, that here's what you can do. Here's a public meeting coming up. Here's how to contact your local officials about getting some work done to control those flooding uh, incidents that are happening in your mobile home park. That was very well received, and so people knew that I had value. And that was I had a little yellow sticky, right? One of these things on my bedside, and it just said, and my mom would ask me, and my wife would ask me, how are you going to make this pay? And I said, look, and I wrote it down. I said, build something of value, and the community will tell you what it's worth. And they did. They gave me tens of thousands of dollars in a couple of weeks, and and the advertising sells out, and they continue to support me, either through monthly, annual, or one-time contributions. And but again, it's the agreement I have with the community. I'm going to work my butt off. I'm going to tell you what's happening in your city. I'm never going to charge you or anybody else for it. And if 20% of you or 10% of you can pay, great. You're keeping your community better informed. You're helping so many people in your community by supporting the work that I do, and people see that. But again, you know, the I, I I was shy to tell them, right? But I do now send out campaigns every 3 months or quarterly or whatever, and I tell people, look, because you did this, this happened. Because you gave $5, we were able to save an after school bicycle program, right? With our reporting. I really feel like, I don't own the Post, right? And it sounds really, really corny, but this whole community owns the Post. And here I am. I'm one of your neighbors. I'm not a ginormous corporation. I'm not a hedge fund. None of the money you pay me goes back east. It's produced right here in my townhome, right here in the middle of your neighborhood. I'm your neighbor, and people like that.
And so, as you kind of say, you're not really doing a constant push for memberships. Like, and I did interview the people who started the Discourse and later IndieGraph, and they kind of talked
Yeah,
about this: is waiting several months and then sending out some kind of dedicated email or communication saying this is the impact of the last several months of what your money is paid for, what kind of reporting it kind of, and they say that they get more a better response from that by talking about the impact rather than constantly just having messaging just like support your local news or something like that.
absolutely. And so with this second product, again, I haven't asked for a dime. I've been asked to ask for dimes, and I've said, nope, not yet. We're not until I'm proud of the work we're doing, and I'm there now ish. Not until I'm proud of the work I'm doing, and I'm seeing feedback from people saying, thank you for writing about this, thank you for covering this. This is really important. Not until those moments Do I feel comfortable going to the city or going to people in the community and asking for anything? I feel like you have to earn it. And you can't sit there with messaging saying local news is dying. Local news is not dying. Journalism is not dying. It's just shifting to a different model, a model that newspapers failed to adapt to decades ago and are paying the price. You'll notice that the messaging from these corporate media conglomerates is we're dying, you have to subscribe, you have to subscribe, you have to pay for us, you have to pay for us, and you don't. People get their news from Facebook and Nextdoor and all these other silly places where it's misinformation, and they're not perfectly happy to get it, but they'll get their news and information elsewhere, um, unless you give them something of value. And when you give them a connection with somebody who lives in the community and gives a crap about the community, and will go out to coffee with you, then it's not worth paying for.
So you mentioned that you also have an advertising offering, but you don't have an advertising salesperson, at least locally. Maybe someone in IndieGraph is like helping out on that. How do advertisers find you, and how do they go? What's the process like? How are you finding advertisers basically?
So there's a link for advertising in the both in the daily newsletter uh, and on the website. There's a little bit of cold calling that started at first, but now a lot of it is word of mouth, right? So what's happened is the traditional media play out here is, hey, give us X amount of money and we'll put you on TV, right, to an audience of maybe 100 people who are tuned in. And you don't really ever see, the ROI on something like that. But hey, there's your company and it's on TV, and that's kind of cool. And the same thing with, banner ads in the newspaper website or print ads or anything like that. What happened with the Post is that, I did the ads, just one ad in the newsletter, and the conversion rates they were just nuts, right? Like, there's a wind farm here in town, and they give tours and they sell the tours for X amount of money. They became like my first contract advertiser, and they're finding, like, 40 people a week are coming in and taking these tours, where they would maybe get 40 people a year from their other advertising. So the conversion rates on something like that, right? Hey, I'm opening up a bookstore. They buy an ad and say, hey, we're opening it up tomorrow morning. Our bookstore's opening up, and there's a line down the street. Oh, I saw it in the Post. I saw it in the Post. I saw it in the Post. So that type of personal approach to the advertising, and people know that I vet the advertisers, right? I don't allow anybody to advertise, right? I don't do political ads. I make sure to take care, because anybody who's going to be exposed to my audience, you know, they better be good people. Um, that type of advertising was not something that anybody was used to out here, but now word is spreading. And so I went and opened up my goal in building the website was to make it mobile first. So that meant no advertising, no sponsored content, no Google ads, anything like that. It just had to be a really pure, unadulterated scroll and read, real easy, because all the corporatized, templatized websites here in our area are just these terrible 1990s throwback machines. But I've started to slowly open up to advertising, on the website, and I turned on a little Google ads to see what that'll do, and entered into rev share deals with like Microsoft takes my content and ingests it and shows it on Windows machines and other surfaces here in my local area, and so that diversifies that a little bit. But I was slow to come to it because I just didn't want to ruin that trust that the audience had with me, but 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 I but I communicate openly and transparently with them. And I tell anybody, if you want to see my books, let's have coffee. I'll show you my spreadsheet. You can see my books. I'll tell you the exact business model. I'll tell you everything I'm making. I mean, I have nothing to lose, so I might as well just be transparent with people. And people like that honesty. Advertisers like the relationship we have, and reaching my audience, which is a really good audience with high household revenue, or median income, all that. It's a really good audience.
But the main product for the advertising is like a native advertising unit within
Yep.
the newsletter itself that looks like the editorial content, so people will be more likely to look at it.
Yeah. Yeah, that native advertising, again, nobody else was doing it here, so advertisers were slow to warm to it. But now that they have warmed to it, it's paying off for them.
So, so you mentioned at the beginning of the interview that Microsoft is kind of phasing out your job. It ends this month. They're going all automated, so now you'll presumably be able to work on this full time. So now that you're going to be able to focus on it with all your all your attention, what are your ambitions going forward? What do you want to do more of? What do you want to expand into? Do you want to diversify into anything? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so um, first I want to pay myself. I've never taken a dime out of the company, and I need to do that. And my trusty advisor, who volunteers his time, has shown me a path to that. And I also don't want to not do something else. I like what I do, and I like this business, and I like helping others. So I'm looking for ways to do that, to help other publishers, whether it's working for companies that do that, or consulting, whatever it is. I still want to do that. I don't want what I've learned to go to waste. So having said that, um, in the coming year, I think growing the second product, so that we basically own ish the entire Coachella Valley. As the newspaper fades, I just want to make sure that there's something there that I could spin up as fast as I need to. If they were to close tomorrow, I think the community would be okay. I think it'd be okay. I think I'm ready to we're telling stories in all these other cities now. So I want to focus on growing that. And I also want to expand outside of the Coachella Valley and begin to head west toward Los Angeles and Orange County, and spin up other newsletters in different formats, right? So right now, what I have is a newsroom, and we cover the heck with the traditional news play. But I want to be in more of the aggregator calendar space. I think those are popular, and I want to see what that looks like outside of our community, and just move toward larger and larger chunks of audience, and really build the media business I have, and get it to a point where it can be handed off to somebody, and I can step back. It was never my intention. Well, it was always my intention, and this is kind of a again, I probably sound like I'm blowing smoke, but it was always my intention to use the privilege I have, right, as this older white guy who's worked at these highest levels, to use that to build something that I could hand off to people who don't have that type of privilege. And I'm really proud that a lot of the revenue I make that goes to IndieGraph, they use to help fund, uh, you know, projects that are being done by people who don't look like me. Right, that's a source of pride, and I want to make sure that I find uh, younger people who are the future of this business, who can take over what I've built. And I have December 30th, 2025 circled on my calendar as the day that happens. But who knows, right? I want to make sure that this is something that is going to be around 100 years, but is done right and done by the right people. And that's really what that's always my North Star. That's always what I'm shooting for.
So I've interviewed a lot of media entrepreneurs like you, and I always kind of ask a version of the same question: is you're seeing a lot of these local news startups that start off really lean, like maybe two or three editors for their newsletter per city, and it seems like a lot of their ambitions are just to expand into more and more cities. And when I say, "Oh, would you ever want to build a kind of more traditional newsroom where you hire out a lot more reporters in each city?" A lot of them say no. Like, what are your thoughts? Like, you mentioned that like the Gannett paper had 75 reporters at some point.
Yeah.
Like, could you see the Palm Springs Post and its sister publication having 10, 15 reporters, or do you like the lean approach that you're currently doing, and you'd rather keep that and just keep on expanding, like laterally.
Yeah, my original intention was to create 9 different versions of the Palm Springs Post, one in each city in the Coachella Valley, and hire a reporter for each one of those and run the show. That proved to be a lot to to take on, and it would still be it would still be my preference. I think if I had to if I had to make a choice, it would still be my preference to grow this into the, the dominant or the most visible product with multiple reporters, at multiple, multiple days, multiple newsletters. It would still be my preference to do that, not to be a replacement for the daily newspaper, right? Because I again, I pick my lane, I pick my spot, and civic journalism and city hall journalism is really really needed right now. I don't foresee doing sports or entertainment, or anything like that, right? It's basically news right now. If I had my druthers, and my original dream was to have 9 different reporters and cover this entire valley every single day, pumping out the news for free. Um, but that's not easy said, not easy done. Um, so when I talk about, kind of laterally expanding, it's just, to do pilot programs and and to really experiment, not only for me, but for places like IndieGraph, right, who I work with and I know and I love. I want to see, I'm in a unique position where I can take some risks. So let's experiment. Let's see if something like this works versus something like that. And if it works, it works. If it doesn't, lesson learned. Um, but my what I get up in the morning wanting to do is to build really cool things on the internet, really cool media products, really cool news products. I want to serve the community, but I also want to do really cool forward focused things. That's why I started Microsoft's first social media accounts back in the day. That's why I went to Gannett and said I think we should put the paper on the internet back in the 90s. I always want to do the next cool thing, and I think I'm doing it right now.
Awesome. Well, Mark, those were all the questions I have for you. Where can people find you online?
So you can go to thepalmspringspost.com, or if you're out here, you can go to cvreporter.com. This is the Coachella Valley Reporter is our next is our other product. Again, I mean, I'm on LinkedIn. Um, uh, the products are on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, everywhere you want to find them. We'll be there.
Great. Well, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it.